So what do these focus-specific settings actually mean? Let's start with render in front. What render in front does is it tries to render the focus in front of any avatars or world geometry. So there won't be any kind of intersections with the world geometry or avatars. So if we have render in front enabled, and then if we, for example, have some kind of object, for example, a cube, it's like right in front of the focus, as you can see, the focus renders on top of the cube. But if we disable render in front, now, as you can see, the cube clips through the focus. And you can imagine that you have an avatar, and the avatar is like right here at the tip of the focus, and certain parts of the avatar clip through and kind of obscure the effect. If you don't want that, I definitely recommend turning render in front on. Now, if you have two focuses next to each other, you might end up in a situation where they fight for who is going to be rendered on top of who. So if we duplicate this and move it out, and if I move back and forth, you will see that as I move side to side, one of them flicks in on top of the other one, and they kind of start fighting for who actually is on top here. And that might not be something that you want, and the way you can fix that is by having a new material. Let's duplicate that, assign it to here. So we're going to take blue 2 and increase this to 30116. So we've increased this by 1. So the right one is at 3015 render queue, and the second and the left one is at 3016 render queue. And now if we move these close to each other, as you can see, the left one always renders on top of the right one. And there is no flickering anymore. That's good. Minimum length determines the minimum length that the focus will be at. And that's a bit of a weird thing to say because like these don't seem to have any length, so to say. But if we disable both minimum and maximum length, you will see that now our entire screen has been enveloped. And what's going on? Well, we can take a look by going over here into the shaded drop down here and enabling shaded wireframe. And now there's a couple of focuses here, so it's a bit hard to see exactly what's going on. So we're going to take that, we're going to move it further up, so we have a bit of a clear viewport. And as you can see, the wires here are the wireframe of the mesh. Those are the triangles that we're actually rendering. And as you can see, the triangles are stretching out and stretching in depending on how far away I am from the center of the focus. And the minimum and maximum lengths control this sort of stretchiness. So if we go here and we turn on maximum length, we can now see that the length of the stretchiness has been capped at some unit value. Now, if we increase this, we can see that the length is increasing. So you can think of this as how much will the focus stretch from the origin point toward the camera. Like, what is going to be the length of the focus as it tries to stretch toward the camera? This determines the maximum length of that, while this determines the minimum length of that. If I set this to 2 and then set the min length to 1 and start looking at the side here while increasing the field of view to be quite large, you will see that there is a point at which the focus edge follows the camera as I'm moving closer to this origin. But then there's also a point at which the edge stops following me, and that's where we've hit the minimum length. Now, the length of this focus right now is 1, and so we can't go below 1. So if I disable this, boom, now the edge follows me again. And it can follow me all the way up to the very center. So we can turn this on. I found that these default settings of minimum length 1 and maximum length 2 to work pretty well. But if you want your focuses to always, no matter what, follow the camera, you can turn off the maximum length. So what are these transparency effects? For them to work, you have to have transparent rendering turned on, as they do transparent things. as you can see, there's already something going on here as soon as we turn it off. And what you see here is the edge fade out. So if we go back to shaded wireframe, as you can see, the effect at the edges is faded out, and it fades in as we get closer to the center, and that's the edge fade out right there. So if we disable that, it's no longer present. What the values here mean is that the start is where the edge fade out begins, and at the end is where it ends. And you can think of that as the 1 here being the very edge of the focus mesh over here, and the 0 being the center of the mesh, and every value in between is somewhere in between these two extremes here. So if we want to start the fade out at 0.5 and end it at 0, we can do that. Or maybe we want to end it at 0.5. So as you can see, at the halfway point, it's already completely solid. But if we want there to be a smooth curve, smooth fade in from the edge to the center, we can do that with 1 and 0. You can also flip these. What if I want the start to be 0 and the end to be 1? Now we completely flip this on its head. Now it's completely solid at the start, at the edges, but it's completely transparent at the very center, and we can go anywhere in between that. So maybe we want some kind of vignette hypno effect, so we can mess around with the values a little bit and get that. If we disable the wireframe, as you can see, we have that. We have the center that's completely transparent, but the edges are not. And we can, of course, invert this as well and get the opposite effect. What is this distance fade out? And for the distance fade out, if we disable edge and enable distance, and then move in and out, the focus effect will fade in and out depending on the distance between any given pixel and the camera position. So we can think of this as the pixel that we're trying to draw. If the camera is 2 units away from it, then the pixel will be completely transparent. And if the pixel is 0 units away from the camera, then it will be completely solid. Maybe we want to set this to 1, and now if it's 1 units away, if it's less than 1 units away, then it will be completely solid. And we can also flip it on its head and make it so that the closer you are to it, the more the focus effect will fade out. Kind of gives it a neat look, doesn't it? What is the scale then? The scale is the size of the focus, and you can really think of this as the sharpness. It's a bit hard to see what exactly I mean by sharpness in the editor, but if you decrease this, the focus will become really sharp in VR. Like this will look like a very sharp cone that you're looking down when you're staring at this in VR, but if you increase this to, more than 1, this will look like a very flat surface in VR. So you can think of this as scale because it also controls the size, as you can see, but also controls the sharpness. How sharp is the focus? How sharp is the convergence toward the center? And we need this because we can't really control the scale of this using the transform. So what is this forward offset parameter? This controls how far the visual center of the focus will be offset from the actual center of the focus. I've put a sphere at the very center of the focus here. And right now, the focus always tries to point towards the center of that sphere, no matter what. It always tries to go there. But if we increase the forward offset a little bit, we can see now that if I, at very extreme angles, try to go as close to the center as possible, you can see that it's a little bit away from the sphere. It's like not quite on top. It's not quite at the center of the sphere. It's like a little bit offset from the center. It's offset from the center of the sphere towards the camera by this length. That's how you need to think of that. So if we set this back to 0 and we try to get closer, as you can see, the center is pretty much inside the sphere. Like you can't really clip through the focus without clipping through the sphere first. But if we set this to 0.5, the sphere is behind the focus now. We need to clip through the focus first before we get into the sphere. And one of the ways you can actually use this is by, say, if you don't want to use render in front, but you still want to avoid situations where the focus clips through some avatar geometry or something, but you still want the focus to point towards the center of the avatar's face or some other part, you can use the forward offset. So for example, if we set the forward offset here to 0 and we use a bigger sphere, the center of the focus is just completely obscured. You can't even see it. The avatar or the sphere here completely covers it. Not what we want. But if we mess around with the forward offset, we can make it so that the focus always points toward the center of that sphere, but visually it is in front of the sphere without having to render in front of everything else. So that means we can have another sphere obstruct the center, but the focus is not obstructed by other geometry that, like, not obstructed by the geometry that it's offset from using this forward offset. So that's very useful if you want to, for example, if you have an avatar with a long snout or something and you want to make sure that the snout doesn't hide the focus effect, you can use the forward offset to make sure that the focus is always a little bit in front of the snout.